You expressed interest in watching what other states do to see what they're doing right, but you also expressed concern about Ohio not participating in the development of our standards. So could you just clarify those two different points you made during your testimony?
Okay. Chairman Stapleton, I'm Representative Bishop. I may need clarification on your question. That saying that Ohio did not participate in the writing of these standards?
You expressed concern in Ohio not participating, that you wanted to see Ohio participate in writing the standards for Ohio's education.
Yes. Thank you. I need to say Chairman Stapleton. Yeah, my concern was that in the context of where this race to the top competition happened, we were required to adopt a common set of standards stating that's common to all states. And in a sense, we had to agree to them without even knowing what the final standards were. So my concern is, it really wasn't an Ohio-guided process, it was an Ohio opting-in process. And I think an appropriate discussion is kind of like the one that Massachusetts had when they were down in the dumps education-wise, and they came up with some rigorous standards with which to improve the status quo in their state. My concern is, and I've seen some memos that have been provided in your folders. I don't know who wrote those memos because they're not attributed to anybody, but kind of debunking some of the concerns that have been raised. These are legitimate concerns. And if we wind back the clock, and again, I will be glad to provide some additional proponents who will explain to you more in depth about how we got to where we are today. But I feel like it was not a process that the citizens of Ohio really were conscious of. I don't think it's a process that the legislature in a big way was aware of. Probably we could go back to 2009, just as Representative Phillips was talking about my votes, and see other votes that people cast not knowing at the time the implications of what they were doing. Wouldn't be the first time the Ohio legislature voted on something and later found out the unintended consequences of what they had done. So I think this is appropriate for us in light of where we find ourselves today. To not say, well, we're so far down the road, we can't do anything. I think that's an appropriate way for us to go. I think when we identify something that's a concern, we sit down at the table, we come up with appropriate standards, we raise those standards, we recognize it's going to take time to get to where we want to be. But I think you know, part of what this process feels like is all of a sudden we figure out that we're 2 years down the road or 1.5 years down the road, and people say, it's too late now. You took the money. My position is always that you re-examine what you're doing, and if you feel like you could do better, if you feel like you're underserving the students of Ohio, whether they're talented, gifted, or special needs, or whatever, that you should revisit that decision and make sure that we come to a conclusion that is fully vetted, that it's not merely known about by a select few. You know, we heard from the physical education guy, this was a stealth program that came in. Talk about a stealth program. This is a stealth program that has roots back in the, late 1980s, 1980s, then on through the 90s. I mean, and again, the federal government, every president wants to be an education president. The only problem is it's supposed to be a state and local responsibility. So, I want to revisit that. I want to reassert our state control, reassert our local control, and reassert our ability to have that conversation, come up with a conclusion that makes sense for teachers, students, parents, everybody. Because again, when you get to those assessments, and you've got a 5th grade kid sitting there in front of a computer answering whatever they ask them to answer, that concerns me. And that concerns me about how that data will be used. And it concerns me in terms of the outcome for this kid. I mean, if Winston Churchill had to take that assessment and that would have determined what career he was going to have, he would not have panned out. He wouldn't be the guy we revere in history. If Thomas Edison had to go through this, Thomas Edison would never have gotten through the wickets to become what he was. So, an educational system needs to recognize the individual talents, skills, shortcomings, or attributes of each child, not to treat every child roughly the same. They used to have a joke in East Germany, we've got one flavor of ice cream, it's not very good. We want to have a dynamic, colorful, creative, inspiring education system in Ohio. I'm afraid that with one set of common standards, you're not going to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.